Have you ever wondered why some people become fluent in Mandarin Chinese while others struggle for years without making progress? I've spent over a decade coaching thousands of Mandarin learners, and I've discovered something pretty fascinating. The people who achieve fluency aren't necessarily the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who approach language learning with the right mindset. And in this video, I'm going to reveal the 8 critical mindset shifts that changed the game for me and have helped thousands of our members achieve massive breakthroughs with Chinese. So let's start with the most foundational mindset transformation that everything else builds on: truly believing that fluency is possible for you. So you got to go from, I can't really become actually fluent in Chinese in less than a decade, to fluency is absolutely possible for me and pretty soon. So whether you think you're too old, not smart enough, not disciplined enough, you can't live in China, or even speak regularly to Chinese native speakers, whatever limiting belief that you have, you can become conversational and fluent in Chinese. And it doesn't have to take years and years of full-time study. Now, there is a specific reason why most people don't believe that, and it's destroying their progress before they even begin. So when I first started learning Chinese, I was completely overwhelmed, like most people, right? The characters looked like alien squiggles, the tones sounded impossible to distinguish, I'd make embarrassing mistakes constantly, and I was convinced that I'd never be able to really have a smooth conversation at one point. Sounds familiar, probably. 但现在我用中文聊什么话题都很轻松，没什么难度的啊。And now I can speak comfortably, right? So here's one of the things that changed the game for me, right? I personally met and watched videos of real people who had reached a high level of fluency, not linguistic geniuses or people that grew up in bilingual households, obviously, regular people with jobs and families and limited study time. I also did more research into what fluency actually is, and that made it way less intimidating as a goal. So the truth is, right, fluency is not about knowing every word in the language. It's about getting really good at using a core set of words in different contexts. You'll need like 3,000 characters and about 10,000 words to get to a really advanced level. But even with just a few hundred characters and a couple of thousand words, you can actually have really smooth conversations as long as you master those words, right? So it's not an infinite mountain to climb. It's a defined, achievable goal. And with the right approach, you can reach functional fluency much faster than you might think, because it's not about how many words you learn, it's about how you learn them. Oh, and if you want to learn the right way, click the link in the description to sign up to our course for free. Join our community, start mastering Chinese character by character, word by word, and sentence by sentence, and see just how simple, fun, and completely possible fluent Chinese can be. Now, with that said, let's go on to the next crucial mindset shift. Stop trying to learn Chinese. Instead, start trying to become a Chinese learner. So one of the most transformative mindset shifts you can go through is shifting from outcome-based habits to identity-based habits. When I started out with Mandarin Blueprint, my goal was to fix the broken education system for language learning, specifically for Chinese, right? And my business partner and I spent years building a curriculum doing just that. Once that was done, we realized that our work was still far from over, because the biggest battle our members had to face next was actually showing up consistently every day and doing the course. After lots and lots of research into habits and consistency, I realized that it's so much easier to show up and do what you need to do to get to fluent Chinese if you actually make those activities part of who you are. And once you get there, it actually becomes difficult not to do Chinese every day. And once that is the case, your success is pretty much guaranteed. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. Showing up every day, even for just 10 or 15 minutes, and doing the right things that build your identity, for example, as a fluent Chinese speaker, such as learning characters, learning words, reviewing sentences, having conversations. Every time you take these actions, you are casting a vote for that new identity as a Chinese learner or a Chinese enthusiast or Chinese fanatic even. If you watch less English Netflix and YouTube and more Chinese stuff, you're casting more votes for learning Chinese or being a Chinese learner. And the more you do this, the more your identity shifts. Eventually, whether it takes days or weeks or months, you'll have cast enough votes to win the election. You become that new identity. And one day you'll find yourself thinking, hey, I'm a Chinese learner. and it will feel weird not to learn Chinese. And at that point, not learning Chinese becomes harder than actually learning it. That's where I am now. Like, I can't go a whole day without doing something, even if just listening to a few minutes of Chinese sentences or watching a short video on YouTube in Chinese. And that's the goal, right? So shift your mindset from I'm trying to learn Chinese to I am a Chinese learner. And every day I'm just casting more votes to confirm that. And this leads very nicely onto the next crucial mindset shift. This is something that we instill into all of our Mandarin Blueprint members, and that is the concept of no 0 days, which has a powerful psychological principle behind it. So most people think consistency means studying for 2 hours every day, no matter what. So when life gets a bit crazy, when they get sick, they're traveling, they're dealing with a family crisis, or they're just having an off day, they tend to just do nothing at all. That's a 0 day. And 0 days are momentum killers. Now, we're not saying you need to study for 2 hours or even 30 minutes or even 15 minutes every day. Everyone has bad days, light days, sick days. Just don't have any 0 days. Do something in Chinese every day, whether that's reviewing your flashcards, which is a good bare minimum to have, or learning one character, reading one sentence, or saying a single sentence out loud before you pass out after a busy day. Doing at least one of these things helps you avoid a 0 day. So what's that psychological principle I mentioned earlier on? Well, it's called identity reinforcement through micro actions. So those micro actions maintain your learning momentum, and they reinforce your identity as someone who speaks Chinese, even on your worst day. Think of it like keeping the water boiling. You turn off the heat completely, the water cools down, and you have to use a lot of energy to get it boiling again. But if you keep it at just a tiny flame going, the water stays warm and it takes minimal energy to bring it back up to a full boil. Now, in our community, we've seen members keep learning streaks for years using this principle, and their progress compounds in ways that shocks us and even them, right? So remember, you don't need perfect days, you just need no 0 days. Now, right now, you might be thinking, Luke, this all sounds great in theory, but I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is between work, family, everything else on my plate. Where am I supposed to find time for Chinese every single day? And that brings us to one of the most important and often the most uncomfortable mindset shifts you'll need to make. Go from I don't have time to I am prioritizing. So this fourth mindset shift involves taking radical ownership of your time and your priorities. Look, you're busy. I'm busy. I get it. Kids, job, workouts, laundry, life. But here's the reality. Everybody has 24 hours in a day, including you. And if Chinese is a priority in your life, decide how much of a priority it is compared to your other responsibilities and give it the time it deserves, whether that's 10 or 15 minutes a day, if it's a relatively low priority, or 1, 2, or more hours a day, if it's a higher priority. But don't lie to yourself and say that you don't have time. You have the time. You're just choosing to spend it on other things. Remember this as well. You don't need to study for 10 years really hard to get good at Chinese. So I had a client on the phone the other day who is a Christian, and he didn't know how he would fit in Chinese into his life as he's got a new baby and 2 businesses, and he spends a lot of his spare time studying the Bible. And then I just told him, look, you'll be studying the Bible for the rest of your life, right? It's not something you'll be finishing in a year or 2, but you don't need to hit Chinese hard for the rest of your life. You just need to hit Chinese hard for a little while. Maybe chill out on the Bible for a year or so, and then go back to it after you're done. Maybe you could sacrifice some things temporarily while Chinese takes a higher priority for just a while, and then you could switch up things later. This is not a permanent thing, right, for the rest of your life. So when something becomes truly important to you, you find the time, right? People find time for Netflix, social media, and countless other activities. The question isn't whether or not you have time, it's whether Chinese is important enough for you to make that time. Now, once you've made that decision to prioritize Chinese and block out the time for it, there's another mental trap that catches almost everyone. And it's actually related to time, but in a completely different way. So you see, when people finally commit to learning Chinese, they often swing to one of the 2 extremes with their expectations. And both extremes will destroy your progress if you're not careful. So this 5th mindset shift is to be realistic about time while maintaining confidence. When learning Mandarin, most people fall into one of two traps. Either they underestimate the time required and get discouraged when they don't see the progress they expected, or they overestimate it and they feel overwhelmed before they even begin. So the solution is to be brutally honest about the time investment required for fluency while maintaining absolute confidence in your ultimate success. So this approach is based on something called the Stockdale paradox, named after Admiral James Stockdale, who survived as a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7 years by maintaining unwavering faith that he would prevail in the end while simultaneously confronting the brutal facts of his current reality. Now, according to Stockdale, many prisoners along with him did not make it, unfortunately, because they thought they'd be out by Christmas. He's quoted as saying, "The optimists were the first to die." So when applied to language learning, this means acknowledging that achieving fluency in Mandarin will likely take hundreds or even multiple thousands of hours of dedicated practice spread over months or years, depending on what level you want to reach and how much time you have to invest per day. And at the same time, you want to maintain complete confidence that if you persist, success is quite literally inevitable. It isn't blind optimism to think this. It's evidence-based confidence built on the knowledge that many thousands of people have done this before you, and they weren't anything special. So this balanced approach keeps you both grounded and motivated, the perfect psychological state for long-term learning. But here's where a lot of people go wrong. Even when they have the right mindset about time and commitment, they sit down to study with all the best intentions. They put in their hours, they follow a curriculum, but they're learning in a way that feels productive but actually isn't. And this brings us to a mindset shift that can literally cut your language learning time in half and get you to fluency faster. So I want to go from passive to active learning. Picture this. You're watching a Chinese lesson on YouTube. The teacher is explaining grammar patterns, showing character breakdowns, giving you examples. You're nodding along thinking, yeah, this makes sense. It feels good. I'm learning. I get it. You feel productive. You feel like you're learning. And 2 days later, nothing. You've got no idea what was covered in that lesson. Or how about this? You spend a month or two watching Chinese TV, listening to Chinese podcasts. You spent 100 hours or more immersed in the language. You have this vague feeling that you're improving, but you can't see it or feel it in reality. You begin to recognize and understand a little bit more as you continue to immerse, but it doesn't lead to real improvements in your speaking ability, not with any efficiency anyway. So these are examples of passive learning. It's one of the biggest time wasted in language education. Instead of passive consumption, I highly recommend focusing on active recall, the science-backed way to make learning stick permanently. So instead of just focusing on being able to understand Chinese, actually try and produce it. Use flashcards that force you to recall characters and word meanings. Speak Chinese sentences from scratch or based on an English translation. Passive watching is entertainment. Active engagement is transformation. So when you actively recall information, you strengthen the neural pathways through a process called retrieval, right? Each time you successfully retrieve information from your memory, you're kind of rewiring your brain to make that information easier to access in the future. You're dragging words from your passive vocabulary into your active vocabulary. It's tough, but in my experience, you get way more bang for your buck from this exercise than any other one I've tried. Now, when you start actually implementing active learning techniques like this, something interesting happens. You begin to see real measurable progress. You can actually feel yourself getting better day by day. But here's where another psychological trap can sneak in, one that can actually turn this progress against you. So mindset shift number 7 is to focus on the journey, not the destination. So this shift in focus separates successful learners from those who struggle. And there's a specific technique to implementing this successfully that most people completely miss. First, it's important to understand that fluency is a spectrum. And once you get to, say, B2 fluency, which is mastery of like a couple of thousand words, it's not like everything's suddenly going to change. You'll just keep learning and you'll be on your way to C1, which is maybe like double that. And then maybe even C2 one day, who knows? But even if you do get to C2, which is better than a lot of native speakers, you'll never feel that different to how you do now. So when you start seeing real progress, it's natural to get excited and start thinking, I want to be fluent, or when will I be fluent? But here's the paradox. The more you focus on that future state, the more you're living in tomorrow instead of today, and that future always seems just out of reach. And besides that, this creates a perpetual state of dissatisfaction with your current abilities, which is psychologically draining, kind of demotivating. The irony is that this future focused mindset actually makes fluency less likely, not more. So, what's the alternative? Well, instead of obsessing over the end goal, successful language learners focus on daily processes and small wins. They set up systems that make daily progress inevitable, and they find joy in incremental improvement. This isn't just feel good advice, this is backed by solid psychological research. Studies show that people who focus on process goals rather than outcome goals not only enjoy their pursuits more, but actually achieve their outcomes faster. So, what's that specific technique I mentioned earlier? Well, it's creating what I call minimum viable daily habits. Instead of setting ambitious daily goals that you'll abandon when life gets busy, establish a minimum daily practice that's so small it feels almost trivial. Maybe just, I don't know, 5 minutes of flashcard reviews or listening to one short dialogue. Once you start this minimum practice, you'll usually continue beyond it pretty much every time, actually. But even on your busiest days, you'll maintain the continuity of your learning streak, which is crucial for long-term success. Now, in our community, we've seen that the members who keep up with consistent, small daily habits always outperform those in the long run who study intensively, but sporadically. Remember, fluency is not some destination that you suddenly arrive at. It's the result of thousands of small daily actions gradually compounded over time. And once you get there, you'll just be thinking about the next step after that anyway. But let's be honest about something. Even with the best intentions, the best systems, the best mindset about focusing on the journey, etc., life is going to get in the way sometimes. And when it does, there's one final mindset shift that will determine whether you ultimately succeed or join the millions who gave up. The final mindset shift is to believe that there's only one way to truly fail at this. One of the most common patterns I see is people missing a few days of study and then missing a few more because they feel guilty. And then eventually they just abandon learning entirely or take at least a very long break because they've failed. So this all or nothing thinking is one of the biggest killers of language learning progress. But here's something I'd like you to think about. Missing days, weeks, or even months doesn't mean you've failed. Having periods where you're inconsistent doesn't mean you've failed. Forgetting words you once knew doesn't mean you failed. The only way to truly fail at learning Chinese, or anything really, is to quit permanently. So life happens, right? You get sick, you go on vacation, you have a crisis of some kind, or you simply hit a motivational slump. These interruptions are normal and expected. And the difference between those who eventually achieve fluency and those who don't isn't that the successful learners never have gaps or never step up here and there. It's that they are resilient. They can recover quickly. They simply draw a line and start again without beating themselves up. Oh, and if you do have to draw a line and start again after days or even weeks of falling off the wagon, instead of trying to jump back in at your previous intensity level, which just creates resistance, you temporarily lower the threshold for what counts as success to almost nothing until you're back into the swing of things. Maybe that means just opening your flashcard app and reviewing a single card or listening to 1 minute of Chinese audio. The specific activity doesn't actually matter. What matters is reestablishing your identity as someone who studies Chinese. So once you've done this micro restart for a few days, you can then gradually increase back to your normal routine. This technique works because it bypasses that psychological resistance that comes up from feeling like you need to make up for lost time. Seriously, don't do that. Remember, learning Mandarin is not a sprint, and it's not even a marathon. It is a lifestyle. There will be periods of intensity, periods of maintenance. What matters is that you keep coming back. So there you have it, the 8 mindset shifts that make Mandarin fluency inevitable. These aren't just motivational concepts, right? They are practical psychological tools that have helped thousands of our members and myself transform their relationship with Chinese learning. I've seen people go from complete beginners to having confident conversations in Chinese, reading novels and even conducting business, all because they shifted how they thought about the learning process. But here's what I want you to understand. Mindset alone is not enough, right? You need the right methods to go with that right mindset. So you can have the most positive attitude in the whole world, but if you're using ineffective techniques, you'll still struggle and take ages to get to your goal of fluency. So check out this video next where I teach you the best approach that I've found over a decade of coaching thousands of Mandarin learners just like you.